So to follow up on my previous video, meritocracy and ethics in pay to win, there were a couple of ideas when I was rewatching it, and I do rewatch my videos. That I I skirted around the idea and I didn't particularly strongly touch on it, or I totally forgot. Usually, I'll go find some rabbit hole and go explore some other idea that pops into my head at the time. And so the two things that I forgot to mention, it's pretty obvious. When a game is hard, so if paying to win makes the game any easier, in the sense of there's less the winning that is there to be had must be done by the person's own competency, even if that's just time. Um, when that's there, a player pushing against that barrier, they will find a greater sense of accomplishment, a greater feeling of reward, a success that's there that would not exist with the 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 ease of entry that's granted by money. And go ahead and extend that into real life. You're handed stuff as a child, and there's nowhere near the reward as overcoming obstacles. Now, that isn't that isn't universally true, because there's nuance in that you can't put obstacles in somebody's way and then have them overcome it, and then that's the way you help them feel better about this stuff like that. It's an interesting commentary on over mothering and making something and pulling all the barriers down so your child can just frolic through, because that's unrealistic. That requires a mother to always be there. So in the context of playing a video game, I mean, the paying to win runs out. It eventually goes away. And so the frolicking play of the person burning their money to play the game, that mothering runs out. And then they enter the real world, the end game, where all of the forging of the player that occurs as they're pursuing the game, as I want to say something like as the authors intended. That's not exactly the right thing to say, but in a sense of that player being forged as they get through to endgame is a totally different experience than a person just being ferried through everything to get to the real game. And I had already talked about a lot of the concepts of endgame and all this kind of stuff, but just to get it out of the way. So the feeling of success when overcoming a legitimate challenge, as opposed to just getting help, especially when help isn't even needed. And sometimes when when the pay to win is pushed really hard, it will convince players who never really would have needed it to go after it. So there's the game finds success in getting more money out of the players. But what happens to a player that is sucked into that too easily? A player like that would have found a feeling of accomplishment without that money, that option being there in the first place. And there's some other players where there's they kind of have to pay to win because they want to get to the end game, where that's what they want. That's what they want. But for a lot of players, there's something to be had in the actual full experience of a game, not just making it to. Technically, end game should be like, you're done, go play another game. That's technically that's what games used to be. Replayability for a lot of games was completely absent. It was so absent that, I mean, the idea of randomness in video games was not a thing. I mean, even in arcade games, I remember the first time I came across an arcade game that had actual randomization. You know, these games are playing. You've got your little character with a gun running around, and then you've got enemy A in position A comes down, and it shoots at wherever you happen to be, and there are patterns and stuff like that. But this game, what I suspect it did is based on your recent actions, it would have something spawn in some different place. It wasn't the exact same one in every single place. And that idea of randomness made that game far more replayable. Other games, it's the exact same level, the exact same stuff every single time. And that makes like live speed runnings would be a much more interesting thing to see if the games were properly randomized, properly replayable in that sense. But anyhow, off topic. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the other kind of feeling of success. It's there's a kind of temptation that exists, and I'm not necessarily talking about a player resisting the corporate machine that wants to take their money. I'm thinking in terms of more like a player. They know the options there, but they are not tricked into it, so they're not falling down that pit, but they do intentionally resist it, right? So they intentionally resist it, and it's always there, and they proceed through the game, they progress, and they reach the end game having never succumbed to that. And there's another kind of feeling of accomplishment that happens when the temptation is right there, and they've got the money to do it, and there are actual rewards, and maybe even some of those rewards would be just if I pay a little bit, then I'll get quite a big bundle of benefit that it would have been so handy if only I did that thing, if only I purchased that thing that let me do this thing, if only I got more inventory space, if only this, if only that. And they just, perhaps many times, perhaps every time they interact with certain features, every time they interact with their inventory, they're reminded, if it only costs 200 rubies to go and buy one more inventory space, if you only had that, then you wouldn't have to go back to a store and sell this stuff, or you wouldn't have to do this. And every single time in the game, when they ever have to come across a store or an inventory or anything like that, they're reminded of that, and then they stand up to that temptation, and they say, no, I don't want that. And at some point, it becomes kind of a character quality. And at endgame, when that person reaches it, there is another kind of sense of accomplishment. There's a kind of sense of self-sufficiency, of having overcome something that was even more difficult, because it wasn't just the challenge of the game itself, but it was the challenge of the game in its true, authentic form, and while resisting that fourth wall monster that's back there that wants to tempt them. And along those lines, there is another version of playing games where that sense of accomplishment is manufactured by the players, in the same sense as replayability can actually, we think of it as being something that is created from the game development side of things, where they create randomization of some sort, and then so every time a player gets to play the game, it's something slightly different. Same general mechanics, the same monsters act the same way, but they spawn in different new places, or levels are mixed and stuff like that. That's all wonderful stuff, but there's a version of it, something like when reading a book, a fan would create something called headcanon, which is they read the book or the series, and they understand it so well that they can imagine like a what if scenario, or they can imagine a life of the characters after the series ends, or this kind of stuff. And in the same way, video games have something where a player can choose to have restrictions placed on themselves. Sometimes it's competitions for speed. Sometimes it's I choose to play that game, but without these rewards that I definitely would have earned in the mechanics of the game. Like I choose to not get that quest reward, or I choose to not wear this kind of equipment, or I choose to level with certain restrictions, like certain kinds of magic or a certain class or a certain, and they're kind of like hobbling themselves in some sense, and putting themselves up to the challenge of like, I wonder what the game would be like if I never did this, if I didn't do that kind of quest at all, and I didn't make myself level efficiently by going after, looking at the math and okay, well, if you only level in dungeons and from this level range, then you can do it faster, and then you come out here and you do these quests, and they're like, well, maybe I'll just wander around. I remember leveling a character in World of Warcraft, and what I decided was, because it was a character all in the dark, and I wasn't interacting with all my previous characters. I wasn't getting any handouts. I wasn't getting any free stuff. So it's kind of authentic in my little box, and that's one way of making the same old thing new. And I decided that every time I came across, I was an herbalist and a miner, which is so I can like pull resources out of the environment. I don't know how to use them for anything, but I can sell them. So that's the way the character could generate income. Turns out to be a really bad way. I think maybe it was herbalist and skinning or something like that. Because a lot of people do it, so there's a lot of competition, so the prices are nothing. But you can vendor it all, and you can make a little bit of money. And I decided that when I'm wandering around doing the regular quests, I would just kind of like wander, and I would not care so much. And whenever I came across like an herb in the distance, I would go to that, and I'd be like, oh, it's a new direction. I would go there. I wouldn't continue what I was working on. I wouldn't finish the quest really quick and then go. I would just like stop everything, and now that's the direction I care about. And then oftentimes I would kind of have to fight my way over there, and I've never been over here before, and oh, that's something new, and there's an herb over there now. Okay, well now I have to. So everything took 3 times longer, and that's a way of manufacturing replayability, manufacturing player interest, and the sense of accomplishment in a player having gone through placing their own restrictions in the game, like another set of mechanics, honestly, like some kind of honor system where they just they choose to have a restriction that they place on themselves, even if it's not part of a competition or anything like that. And then when they make it to end game, they can be like, I didn't like, that was really fun. It was really fun doing like playing the game where I never back down from a fight ever, never run away. And like now you have your end game character, and you're like, now you really know how to do that. You really know how to fight 3 things at the same time, and you only do this and you only do that, and the end result is a sense of accomplishment that's very, very different, and it's antagonistic to the sorts of things that would happen in that kind of player if they were to pay to win instead, if they were to do things optimally, if they go to look up guides, if they were to all this kind of stuff. So those are the 2 things that I ended up like, again, with the 15-minute videos. A couple of points to help add to the sense of reward that can happen when pay to win isn't a thing at all.